Now we move on to our regular agenda. I'd like to call to order the Village of Riverside Board of Trustees regular meeting of Thursday, November 7th, 2024. Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge
allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
President's report this evening. First, I'd like to mention the results of the referendum, Village of Riverside street tax levy referendum that was held on November 5th. At this point, we're still waiting for certification from the Board of Elections. At this point, the referendum is passing by a small margin, 5 votes. But I would point out this represents the most ballots cast for a Riverside referendum question since at least 2006, and my guess is probably the most ballots cast ever for a Riverside referendum, but we're not able to confirm that. So Tuesday's totals include all precinct totals, early votes, and a percentage of the mail ballots. Mail ballots postmarked November 5th or earlier could still be counted. We don't know, and we won't know until certification on November 19th. The county clerk's office will update the election results on their website regularly with additional mail ballots. The referendum election results will not be official again until Tuesday, November 26th. I would say that I'd like to add that we knew going into this referendum that it would depend on people taking the time to educate themselves and find out what the referendum's about. And we knew going into it that the ballot wording was challenging. But I'm very proud of our staff and the village to get that information out there. The fact that over 2,300 people voted for the referendum indicates that we reached out to 2,300 people or more. And those we reached out to overwhelmingly, once they understood the issue, were in support of it. But we'll see that we'll wait for the results to be certified. Upcoming meetings, November 11th, Riverside TV Commission here at the Township Hall. November 12th, Board of Police and Fire Commissioners, Quincy Community Center. November 12th, Landscape Advisory Commission, Township Hall. November 13th, Economic Development Commission, Township Hall. November 18th, Historical Commission, again at the Township Hall here, 27 Riverside Road. November 18th, same day, Parks and Recreation Board will meet at the Riverside Public Library. And November 21st is the next meeting of the Village Board of Trustees here at the Township Hall. Upcoming events. Tomorrow night, November 8th, from 7 to 9 p.m. in the auditorium of Township Hall, we will have our brand new Decades Dance. This year, we will celebrate the 1980s, so you're welcome to attend dressed in your best 80s look and get ready for a night of dancing and fun with a DJ and a special photo booth area.
Totally.
A new or gently worn coat that you can donate is all your family needs to access at this point. If you do not have a coat to donate, the entry fee is $15 per family, and there's no truth to the rumor that I will be there with a mullet. Village offices are closed on Veterans Day, November 11th. Manager's report.
Thank you. I have a couple of items this evening. First, I wanted to recognize Assistant Village Manager Monroe for organizing a workshop for Illinois Association of Municipal Management Assistants. It was for special event planning, which obviously we have a lot of experience doing in Riverside. And she actually asked Director Melchiotti to participate as a presenter. And the purpose of these workshops are really important to not only gain additional information of what other communities are doing and how we can do it better, but also sharing our successes as well. And I also wanted to note that Assistant Village Manager Monroe serves on the board of directors for this association as well. Parks and Recreation had their first haunted house, and it was a success and will become an annual event. What many don't realize is the event was purely volunteers, staff volunteers, who were not paid and volunteered their time to host this great event for Riverside residents. So I wanted to recognize Ron, Megan, Elizabeth, and Grace, their friends and family who volunteered to help. In addition to that, we had some village administrative help. Director Zavala was there along with her daughter and sister, and also admin assistant Linda Sandusky. So thank you for volunteering your time and making the event a huge success. Greatly appreciated, and from the feedback that I got, Riverside residents really enjoyed it. And I think our staff did too, secretly. Parks and Recreation also has some exciting programs coming up. Our youth basketball league is taking registrations now. The league is co-ed, but they are also adding an all-girls 5th and 6th grade level. Additionally, they have bought back their Tai Chi classes with a new session beginning in December. So residents and non-residents alike can register for these different classes online while spots are still available. That's all I have this evening.
Thank you. Now's the time on our agenda where we invite resident comments for non-agenda items. If there's any item that you would like to address the board, any village-related item, now's the opportunity to do so. Comments will also be allowed for agenda items as we reach that agenda. Yes, Valerie.
Everyone, I'm Valerie Kramer. I'm a resident of Riverside. And I just had two things today. One is an agenda item, but I've got bedtime coming up. So the first thing is I want to thank you all for being so supportive of Ride Riverside. It's a bicycle group that I started this year, and I came here back in May saying I started this group, and since then we've had 7 rides with an average of 75 people attending, and it's family-friendly, slow riding around Riverside, and we do it the second Friday of every month. And so the next one is this Friday, 6 p.m. at the Riverside train station, and then we'll have one more in December, and then we'll take a pause and start back in the spring. So I just wanted to say thank you for helping me out, and it's been quite a success and safe and fun and family-friendly. And then the second thing, I wanted to just voice my support for some help with the gas-powered leaf blowers, the noise that I'm sure you'll be discussing later, and trying to limit the hours that it is going on, because we moved here from Lakeview in the city, and I'd say that it is much louder here in Riverside than it ever was in Chicago. And like, my neighbors and I, we kind of joke, we have like 2 things we always end up talking about: complaining about fixing our old houses and how expensive it is, and then the second thing is the leaf blowers. So yeah, I just wanted to voice my support for anything that you guys can do to help with the noise pollution. All right, that's it. Thank you.
No other non-agenda item comments. Consent agenda, Clerk So, please. Well, before you read the consent agenda, there was one item that we wanted to pull off the agenda, and that is H, an ordinance amending Title 4, Chapter 1 of the Village Code relating to demolition permits and standards. I think there was a small tweak to the ordinance language that was requested. Then I also just don't want to pull it off the consent agenda, but I wanted to mention G, an ordinance amending Title 3, Chapter 2 of the Village Code relating to alcoholic liquor hours of sale. We had a request, I had received a request from a business owner, Riverside Foods, for reconsideration of the limits on when they can sell liquor. Previously, it was 9 a.m., I believe, during the week, and 11 or something like that on Sundays. And in response, I brought that to the board. The board reacted Staff immediately processed the paperwork, and we're here really quickly. The reason I bring attention to this is I want the business community to know, and everyone to know, that if you have issues, concerns, or anything, that all you need to do is let one of us know. We won't always give you what you need or what you may be requesting, but we will always consider it. And in this situation, it was a pretty easy one. So I mentioned that. With that one
One other thing, since this meeting is technically a separate hearing than from the budget hearing, we're actually going to have to vote to allow trustee Clarity to.
I'm sorry, you're
Yeah,
right.
I just want to get it before we.
Thank you.
before we make the vote.
Let's do that right now.
That's fine.
All in favor?
Aye.
None opposed. Thank you. So Clerk Sol, with that one item pulled from the consent agenda, please read the consent agenda.
Approve voucher list of bills, November 7th, 2024. Approve Village Board of Trustees special meeting minutes for 2024 street tax levy referendum town hall on Tuesday, October 15th, 2024. Approve Village Board of Trustees meeting minutes for public hearing for proposed 2024 tax levy for Village of Riverside and Riverside Public Library on October 17th, 2024. Approve Village Board of Trustees regular meeting minutes, October 17th, 2024. Review and file board and commission minutes, Historical Commission, regular meeting September 16th, 2024. Review and file department monthly reports, Police September 2024, Fire September 24, and Community Development September and October 2024. An ordinance amending Title III, Chapter 2 of the Village Code relating to alcoholic liquor hours of sale. A resolution authorizing the village manager to approve a change order in the amount of $54,259.74 for additional sidewalk and concrete work completed as part of the Berkeley Road Alley Reconstruction and Sidewalk Program. A resolution authorizing the village manager to waive competitive bidding and enter into an agreement with Pave Connect in the amount of $44,936.10 for pavement rejuvenation to be conducted on various village roadways. A resolution approving an assignment agreement between the Village of Riverside, Starbuds, and Jari Enterprise LLC, and motion to approve the 2025 meeting schedule.
Are there any items that anyone would like pulled from that consent agenda? If not, can I get a motion to approve the consent agenda?
Motion is made.
Motion and a second. Clerk Sol, please call the roll.
Trustee Evans?
Aye.
Trustee Koss.
Aye.
Trustee Gallegos.
Aye.
Trustee Marshazga.
Aye.
Trustee Mateo. Trustee Clarity.
Consent agenda is approved. Going back to item H, an ordinance amending Title IV, Chapter 1 of the Village Code relating to demolition permits and standards. I'd ask Planner Siren to give us a brief overview of the modification that's proposed.
Sure, the language should be at your tables, but there's just a brief modification, removing the word mammal and specifying that pests include rats, other rodents, and non-domesticated animals, to the extent that such animals constitute a human health and safety hazard.
Thank you.
Sure.
Any questions on that change? Any discussion on the item before we ask for a motion? Any public comment on this item? No. Can I get a motion to approve the ordinance as amended?
So moved.
Second.
Motion and second. Any discussion on the motion? No. Clerk Sol, please call the roll.
Trustee Evans?
Aye.
Trustee Koss.
Aye.
Trustee Gallegos.
Aye.
Trustee Marshazga. Trustee Mateo. Trustee Clarity.
Motion is approved. Do we have any department or commission reports this evening? Seeing none, we'll move on to pending business. A resolution determining the estimated Village of Riverside real estate tax levy for year 2024. Director Zavala.
Thank you. The truth in taxation law requires that not less than 20 days prior to adoption that the board announce an estimate of next year's tax levy. Included in your packet tonight is a resolution determining the estimated Village of Riverside real estate tax levy for the year 2024. The Village of Riverside total estimated 2024 tax levy is $6,827,514. Of this levy amount, $6,325,014 is for the capped funds, $125,000 is for the non-capped fund for special recreation, and $377,500 is for non-capped debt service. This is an estimated extension of 4.55% increase over the previous year's tax levy that Cook County will decrease based on the final number of EAV. The Riverside Public Library total estimated 2024 tax levy is $1,492,986. Of this total levy amount, $1,369,986 is for capped funds and $123,000 is for non-capped debt service. This is an estimated extension increase of 2.43% over prior year's levy. The library discussed this request at their September 10th meeting. Final adoption is expected December 5th, 2024. And it's important to note that in the village's capped funds, the tax levy referendum portion is included. And Manager Francis can go into detail of the plan for that allocated portion.
So if I may, Director Zavala and I were actually discussing the street tax levy referendum, and actually we spoke with Attorney Pickrell, and in the essence of trying to be as transparent as possible, it is our recommendation that we actually create a special revenue fund specifically for streets, in which instead of the non-home rule sales tax being in the capital projects fund, that would go into the street fund. The tax levy would go directly into the street fund, along with the MF motor fuel tax transfer would go directly into it. So it's a heightened transparency. It would allow for the same items that were eligible under those respective funds, but it is easier then to provide those reports for the board. It's one separate fund. You're seeing what's coming in and what's going out, and it's heightened transparency versus what we had discussed before, which was a fund balance policy update. This provides that even greater level of transparency. So it's going to be a little bit of work for Director Zavala and her team to set it up before the end of the fiscal year, but we just wanted to make sure the board was supportive before we did this. This doesn't change the budget, it just modifies the funds that will be reflected in the final budget ordinance.
I see no reason why not. I'm fine with it.
I appreciate the extra step. Good.
Very good. Any questions for Manager Francis or Director Zavala? Any public comment on this item? None? Any further discussion from trustees? If not, I'd like to ask for a motion
I'll make said motion.
to approve.
Motion.
Motion and second. Clerk Sol.
Trustee Evans?
Aye.
Trustee Costs?
Aye.
Trustee Gallegos?
Aye.
Trustee Marshazga?
Aye.
Trustee Mateo?
Aye.
Trustee Clarity?
Aye.
Resolution's approved. Inventory and assessment of parks and facilities, presentation by Barry Dunn, Director Malchiel.
Good evening, President Pollock, Board of Trustees, Manager Francis. We've completed another phase of our master planning project, the inventory and assessment of parks and facilities. The Barry Dunn team is here. You have the report in your packet. We have Steve Conters and Frank Parisi who will go through the slide deck and take any questions that you have at the end. Also, Elsa Fisher here, our project manager, and I am also available for questions. Steve.
You can go to the next slide, please. So as Ron mentioned, we're really focusing today on the park assessment, facility assessment. This is the very beginning of the process, so we're not coming forward with any recommendations today. This is more about the inventory. And so we're going to go over some map development for the park spaces, as well as some inventory data and analysis, and then move on to facility assessment from there. Next slide. And that's just a picture of us out in one of your parks doing some of the community engagement. Next slide. So first thing we're going to do is we're going to move on and talk about our park maps. So we'd like to start the mapping exercise looking at the context, not just specifically the Village of Riverside, but really the surrounding communities. And so the solid black line is your boundary, and we want to understand what adjacencies there are. So when we talk about park assessment, we can understand what other open space may be available nearby when we start to look at what the needs might be. Next slide, please. From there, we kind of zoom in and look specifically at the Village of Riverside boundaries to understand all the various types of open space that exists for your residents within the boundary. And so we have various sort of shades of green and shades of purple. And so we look at both the village open space, which are your parks, your triangle spaces, your common grounds. We look at the Forest Preserve District spaces, as well as school district spaces. And we use the mapping not only to understand what is owned and what is not owned, but to be able to look at the distribution of those spaces as far as people's access to them. And so this map is just representing all the various types of parks and open spaces that are part of this inventory process. Next slide, please. From there, we take it a little bit of a step further and we break the village into what we call planning areas, which are basically to understand walkability access to your parks and open space within various neighborhoods. And so the planning areas here are preliminary right now. We're still confirming these with staff before we finalize and move forward. But we basically use what are considered walkable barriers to create these planning, which are railroads, rivers, very high level streets, and any other natural barriers. And so these planning areas will be used to assess, again, sort of equal access to your parks and open space throughout the Village of Riverside. Next slide, please. The other thing that, because you have a riverfront going through here, you have two primary parks that are on the riverfront, we want to understand how that river system and the ecology around the river might impact those parks. So we start to look at floodway, floodplain, wetlands throughout various sources of data sets and outline the park boundaries. So this happens to be Indian Gardens, which includes the Scout Cabin, just showing how those various areas might impact the park. Next slide. And we do the same for the Swan Pond area as well. So again, this is all information. We're not drawing any conclusions at this point. It's just collection of data for later in the process. Next slide. From the mapping, then we move on to more of the inventory. And so we start with classifying your parks. And so this is just information that's provided by the National Rec and Park Association. So that we're using guidelines that are established at a higher level that it defines how parks might be classified. And so we look at like mini neighborhood and community parks, which are typically your more active parks, where there's going to be playgrounds, sport courts, and sport fields. And then the other category you see there, sort of natural areas, special use, and trails, might be considered more passive spaces, where there might be trails or seating areas, but not high activity. Next slide, please. So with those classifications, then we move into a matrix where this is going to be our data set of your parks, amenities, and acreage that we use for benchmarking purposes. Next slide. And so this matrix is a handout that's before you, the 11 by 17. There's no need to actually read the data here. We just want to explain what this matrix is providing through the process. So here's where we take those classifications of your parks, which is along the left column, and then we also look at the acreage. And so that's sort of the secondary column that you see there with the term acres at the top. Across the top is all the different amenities. So this one matrix is able to identify what your park classifications are, what their acreage is, and what types of amenities and the quantity of those amenities that exist in your park. So this is basically our primary data set of your parks, their acreage, and their amenities that exist that we can use to do benchmarking as we move into the process. Next slide. And so this is where we get into that benchmarking that we talk about. The first thing we analyze is the amount of actual acreage of open space and parks you have in your system. This is just a working worksheet that we use sort of behind the scenes. The data will be pulled into the report, but we kind of use this for just transparency purposes. But if you move on to the next slide, we can kind of hit some of the highlights of the outcome of that level of service analysis. So we use a 10 acres per 1,000 people population, which is a guideline, again, set by NRPA. And so you'll see various graphs here identifying the outcome of that. So the first graph is looking at strictly your mini neighborhood and community parks. Again, those three type of parks that are your core activity parks, and understand how much acreage you have. When we look at your population, the acreage that is actually recommended, or the target acreage per your population, would be 9304 right in the middle there. As we move to the next graph over to the right, you can see where you guys are at. The Village of Riverside acres is 44.5. So when we're looking at just your key active parks, you're well kind of below the benchmark. But as we continue to build on your system and the other types of open space and parks you have, you see that you get much closer to that target. The next one over, the upper right there, starts to take into consideration your natural areas like Swan Pond, your special use areas. And so now you jump from 44 acres to 81 acres. So you're just a little bit below that 93 acre guideline. And then once we look at all the other available open space within your system, your common areas, your triangle areas, the forest preserve properties, you guys jump up well above that, because now that 93 acres, we're able to add that area to the right. You can see your 81 acres, you can add 87 acres of forest preserve district space. So now you're well beyond the guideline when you consider all that. So we like to look at it from various perspectives and vantage points to understand where you are within the benchmarking. Next slide, please. The other thing that we start to do then is we look at your amenities. So we looked at your acreage. Now we're looking at the amenities you have and how many amenities you provide per your population. There are two data sets that we look at. The first one is called Park Metrics. This is a self-inputting national-wide database, meaning that other recreation departments and agencies throughout the nation are putting information into this database on what they have for their populations. We look for communities that are sort of similar size populations to be able to compare you to. So again, this is just a standing worksheet that shows how sort of the math behind the scenes. Next slide. The key highlights of the results of that is when we compare you to those benchmarks in that data set is you're sort of behind on playgrounds, pickleball courts, tennis courts, and some things aren't going to be as impactful into the context of your community, but we're just pulling the data. So like the golf course thing may not be important to your context, but it's just a data set that we pull. Next slide. So then we narrow down, so we go from the national look to the state look. So SCORP is the State Comprehensive Outdoor Recreation Plan. So the state of Illinois actually does averages of amenities throughout the state and all their communities every couple of years. So we pull that data set, again, to benchmark you to where you're at. Again, this chart is just a working chart behind the scenes that shows the math on how we get to the results. Next slide. And so here's sort of a highlight again. So now that we're looking at the state level, where you start to be behind on is certain miles of hiking trails, playgrounds. Again, now we're seeing an overlap from one data set to the other on being a little bit behind on playgrounds per population, a different type of trail, and then fishing piers, docks, and access, which again, even though you have a river system, this may not be as important to your context. So next slide. So then as a final look at all these amenities, we like to bring all this together in a little bit of an easier to read graph. So now we're looking at your amenities versus the state benchmark versus the national benchmark, all in sort of one view. So I'm going to use the upper left of the slide, the playgrounds, to kind of explain how these graphs work. So you'll see for playgrounds, you guys have a total of 7 within the village. And the statewide average for your population would be 4. The national benchmark shows 7. And so again, now you can start to see in one sort of snapshot where you are in comparison. The difference between the colors for the Village of Riverside column, you've got the 2 different blues, and then you'll see in some of the graphs you even have a green. So the green means it's a village-owned park amenity, and the light blue means that it's beyond its useful life. The state establishes useful life criteria for certain amenities, like playgrounds might be 15 years. So we just want to make sure that even though you might have 7 playgrounds, we understand that 5 of them are sort of beyond that useful life benchmark. It doesn't mean that they're unsafe or they're in bad condition, it just means that their age is beyond the benchmark. The other thing in here is looking at school properties. So you'll notice here for playgrounds, again, you've got a dark blue of 3, so the 7 total in the village are made up of 4 that are on village property and 3 that are on school district property. So again, this is just a snapshot of where you are benchmarked for all of these various amenities. Next slide. And this happens to be some that, aside from the basketball courts, again, we're just comparing you to benchmarks, but you happen to have 0 of these compared to the benchmarks with volleyball courts, picnic shelters. Ice rink, we're talking about permanent ice rinks, because we understand that you do have a temporary ice rink area that you do set up. The only reason we do show 3 basketball courts, though, is it's that color blue again, where these are on school property. So the basketball courts you do have happen to be on school properties. So again, we're not drawing any conclusions and saying that you need these. These are just data sets for us to begin with. Next slide. And so from there, I'm going to hand it over to Frank to go over facility assessments.
Thank you, Steve. Good evening, everyone. My name is Frank Parisi with Williams Architects. If you can go to the next slide, please. So part of our objective is actually to look at your facilities and do an assessment of your facilities. A lot of times we look at this in twofold, not only from a facility assessment perspective, but also as we get to the next phase of the project, we start looking at some of the programming opportunities that could happen there based on the community input that we actually have. So the first facility we actually looked at is the Quincy Community Center, which was recently renovated in 2020. So the building is very well maintained. There are some accessibility issues with regards to the building with the upper level. So let me clarify what that exactly means. The renovation that was actually done in 2020 is fully accessible to the general public. But if you would go to universal accessibility requirements, the upper level would require for it to be accessible to your employees. Considering you are a municipal entity, there are statutes within the state law that actually kind of elevates public entities to actually provide that accessibility to you as well. A couple things that we had looked at there, which I know Ron actually has worked with Public Works with regards to that. We're recommending to actually replace some gutters and downspouts to actually prohibit any deterioration that's actually happening on the building on the outside. Considering the age of the building with its brick, the brick is in poor condition, but we understand that there's also some tuck pointing that would actually be taking place to the building at Quincy as well. Next slide, please. The next building we looked at is the Scout Cabin. One thing that I do have to say, obviously being in Riverside, you have a lot of historical buildings that are in the community. So take my comments kind of at face value when we say those. All right, so that, tremendous. It was built in 1929, renovated in 60. There was an addition that was actually done to that. The building, depending on which condition you look at, is either in fair or poor condition with regards to that. One of the things that is actually in well exceeding its life expectancy is actually the interior finishes. With regards to that, you can kind of see one of the images there. And again, I'm going to talk a little bit about accessibility again with this. Obviously, because the building is a 1929 building and it was renovated to, the image that I'm showing there is with the entry stairs. So technically, the building's not universally accessible from any particular entrance, but it is accessible. There is a walkway that is from the parking lot that goes into the building, so you are compliant in that regard. Of course, we look at that from current standards and the most recent standards from an ADA perspective overall. Next slide, please. The next building we looked at is the Riverside Water Tower. Built in 1870, actually renovated in 2005. My understanding from doing a little bit of research is that's when the Recreation Department moved into that building overall, the building, because of its age and its historical landmark status, of course, is in poor to fair to poor condition, depending on what we look at, all right, in that particular regard. A couple things in their interior finishes that you guys see in the bathroom well exceeded their life expectancy in that regard. Overall, one of the things that we looked at on the picture on the left is obviously because of the age and the construction of the building is experiencing some water penetration into your program room, which I know the village is fixing it. You can see the fix that is actually going on there. I don't know if there's a fix with that. It's just basically the nature of the beast, right? It's a building built in the 1870s with the stone walls. One thing that we did notice as part of that is also the windows. I don't recall if those are the original windows, but they are wood. And depending on where you look at those, they're actually starting to have some dry rot at the sills. So if any capital improvement was allocated there, that might be something we want to look at, of course, staying within the historical context of the community. Next slide, please. Mm-hmm. Did you want to close this out also?
We just want to know if anyone has questions.
Any questions?
Questions from the board? No, public comment, yes, Mr. Maloney.
I'm Mike Maloney. My comment is not going to come as a great surprise. It pertains to the Indian Gardens classification and to a lesser degree the Swan Pond classification. It's classified, I believe, as a community park. And that area, I think it translates to the tax ID boundary for that parcel. I've commented in previous board meetings that we need to have a more granular view of what is subject to development by Parks and Rec, and I would argue that a substantial part of that area that's designated as a community park is much more analogous to the riverbank area along Blooming Bank. So I would request and urge that you guys take a very careful look at perhaps bifurcating the area that's truly a community park. I mean, there are large ballparks there are tennis courts, absolutely a community park, no argument. But a large area that's encompassed in that community park designation is not a community park right now. It's public green space / natural area. So that is what I would urge. Thank you.
Thank you. Any further questions or comments from trustees? No action is needed tonight. Thank you for your report, and look forward to the next steps. Thank you. Next item on the agenda, presentation and update by Williams Architects regarding public safety and community space needs analysis. Mr. Dugan.
Good evening. Thank you, President Pollack, trustees, Manager Francis. Once again, Andy Dogan from Williams Architects. You heard from me last month about some of our findings and conceptual ideas for how the public safety and community space concepts at a very high level that we've been working on could translate to something that could eventually incorporate even larger community spaces up to and including a gymnasium and track space. So following your feedback and consensus last month, we went to work to look at, take a little bit closer look at how that would work to see, to make sure that we are able to comply with the program ranges we've set out for public safety, see if there are any issues potentially inherent in that approach that just for everybody's knowledge we want to put out there. So in other words, does the potential future plan for a gym space impact what we are planning in a nearer term for public safety in any way, and in so how? So what we're going to do tonight is present two different directions for your consideration. One is a little bit of an evolution of what you previously saw last month. I want to talk about some of the opportunities and challenges inherent in that update. And then, because this is still well over the budget identified, at least to do all of these phases at one time, to look at another plan that attempts to balance the need for some community space, improve on the quality and quantity of space that my partner, Mr. Parisi, just presented, and get you a chance to make this all work within the identified budget that you have. And most importantly, answer any questions and get direction to keep moving forward. So if we could move to the next slide. So we learned this last month. Can this complex accommodate these needs? And all about balancing these current and present needs for public safety and community space with future expansion capability. So we want to, if we go to the next slides, please, go through what we have looked at. In these plans, what you're seeing is just a little bit more of an evolution. We've started to define specific police spaces and square footages and tie them to the programming exercises that you heard from us regarding earlier this year. So lower level is covered parking within a garage, mechanical space. The light blue represents police space that makes sense to be on a lower level. Next. Moving up to our main or on grade level, we have primarily our fire spaces, the apparatus bay, what we call fire support. So The areas of the station that, the fire people come into after an event to clean off, decontaminate, not their living spaces, but the fire support spaces would be part of this initial phase. Between and behind the, that fire support in the apparatus bay, we have shared spaces that would be available for use by all of public safety, both fire and police. And then the balance of this level is shared spaces and administrative spaces, again, that are shared between fire and police, and then fronting the entire main floor is a public lobby to be able to access this space in phase one. Next. Going up to the next level, we continue to have an open lobby, more support space to round out the police program. And then we are kind of using another connection, just as we did on the lower level, between the police and the fire living side to have more shared space between the two departments. And in this particular concept for the next slide, next slide please, this starts to show where the community space, at least in an initial phase, could potentially be. So you come up 2 levels from the main level into a lobby space, and this will start to show where a little bit more detail in the kinds of spaces that we were looking at before. So this gives an opportunity for a large community room of about 3,500 square feet. For context, this room we're in right now is around 850, 900 square feet, so a significantly larger space. This does have space for a community fitness center, and then has some opportunities because we would have roof space below to have a roof terrace potentially overlooking the river off of that community room, potentially a green roof over the balance of the apparatus space. So there are nice views from all sides of this public space. Next, please. And then moving forward, we just start to show how this can be filled out into a future expansion with more parking underneath what was previously undeveloped. Moving forward becomes under gym space, which is more parking, some more support space. We move to the next level, and this starts to show how the gym and the fitness piece start to be added to this program. So we have the one-court gym with a track above. We have a separate lobby for what we would call the recreation center component of this. I think by the time you have a gym and fitness, you would want to have that have a separate entrance for multiple reasons. And then next. And then this represents the upper level of that particular plan, which would have the track and a potential fitness center off of that track. You'll notice that we had fitness space in the previous phase of this plan, and this would allow that space that was previously fitness to be captured for more community space once this happened. The adjacency between the gym and the fitness is a really nice one from a functional perspective. Next. And then this essentially becomes, this stays the same in this future phase. The only thing I would note is what we have labeled as community fitness center, because we've already built a fitness center, could become another use to be determined. So there's some flexibility in that plan. So that's one option. The one, and what I wanted to comment on before we get into some dollar figures and some considerations is that what we are finding is that to be able to plan for the eventuality of a gym on this site, we are really compressing the rest of the program, so to speak, for public safety, the spaces they need, into a smaller area. And when we do that, the only way we can maintain the quantity of space that is needed or is recommended is to start splitting that space over several floors. So that's less ideal from a functional standpoint, from a time of service and quality of service standpoint for police and fire. We want to point that out, that we're working with a finite site, and to be able to say yes to a potential gym simply compresses the rest of the plan for a point of understanding. So in discussing this with staff, we wanted to share kind of a updated version of a previous concept where this is a standalone building. This is similar to what you've seen before, but it starts to show how you could have, this is just a single phase project where you can have the parking underneath in a garage. Again, some of that similar police space, mechanical space. Next. The main level becomes fire apparatus and fire support on either side of the apparatus bay, which is really ideal from a service and a decontamination perspective for that workflow as fire workers come in and out of the building. There would be shared space, more police program, and a smaller lobby on that main level. And then next slide. We have a little bit of the remaining police program, and then some smaller community space and a roof terrace here. So this shows a fitness area of about 1,000 square feet, so a little larger than this room. A community room space of 1,750 square feet. We have a program kitchen. We have other spaces to support Riverside TV, restrooms, things of that nature. And then other private areas like fire living space that there would be a door to secure the fire areas from public areas. But that works the entire concept into a basement plus 2 levels rather than a basement plus 3 levels. So this is, if you move forward, we have. I should emphasize that the phasing that we were showing was really our phases 1 and 2 together. So if you go to the next slide, the phase 1 and 2 that showed everything before the gym still does work into this higher budget before we have the gym there. And this is a particularly important slide because I want us to compare this to the other concept and get your feedback on the pros and cons between each and which way we should go. If we go to the next slide, and you've seen this before, as we add that gym and fitness space, that becomes between a roughly 47 and $50 million project as a total project cost. Moving to the option D, where we're sort of compressing the space. This looks at getting as close as we can to a more compact program, some compromise in space. Trustee Mateo, I hope I answered your question via email, but I did want to point out that 26,000 versus 32,000 for the benefit of all the trustees. That represented the low end of our program ranges that we developed. So we weren't taking out space, we just went to the lower end of the recommendations. Yeah, absolutely. So this gets the project to a lower dollar value, but still not to that $20 million target. So the way to get close to that, if we go to the next slide, is to look at some further reductions in those spaces. Is there a way to reduce the public safety space even further? Look for more efficiencies. Can community space be Can that space be reduced even further? Considering that even 1,950 square feet is a substantial increase over what you currently have. And this path gets us to a place where the entire project approaches our understanding of the village's budget capacity. So at the next slide, we just offer some comparisons between these two concepts to talk about. And I think tonight we're not looking for a vote or a direction. If you have a clear direction, that's great. We're looking for discussion and which way you'd like this to go, or if you have questions. So Between these two concepts, option C that has the potential for a gym, there's certainly potential for long-term expansion in the future to include multiple community needs. Unfortunately, that project has future phases that greatly exceed the budget that we've been talking about. We have noted that the need to plan for the future gym squishes the rest of the program into less space and more levels than we would ideally like. So that is a compromise in terms of the public safety program. And we just don't know the timeline as to when we might be able to put those future phases in. So in other words, could we potentially be living with a situation where we have suboptimal space for an unknown period of time until you are able to expand the facility to the full plan? In contrast, the option D does address the most urgent public safety needs and some community space. We do believe that the scope of that proposal can be worked to be within the village's budget target. We do think that although there's some more work in developing the plan and conversations with Chief Buckley and staff about how it works, we do believe that the spatial relationships are a little bit better for public safety, but it doesn't allow for the future gym. Just in stretching out the program to make it work for public safety in an optimal way, we sacrifice that gym. So this is something we just want to make you aware of, these forces pulling at each other, and get some feedback. So I believe that's all we had for tonight. I just want to open it up for questions, comments, and see how we can help you continue to move along.
Thank you. Trustees, comments, questions?
You go first. Oh, you can go first.
No,
Start
Doug
from
can go
there.
first.
Well, I'll start it off just because I want to emphasize a point that I did not realize until today, or maybe no one did, but that concerns me, and that's that by planning for this gym, we are sacrificing somewhat on having the best public safety space. Is that fair to say?
Yes.
It doesn't sacrifice.
It doesn't sacrifice the quantity of space. It sacrifices adjacencies and just relationships between space.
The functionality.
Correct.
In a sense, right. Okay.
I have a comment relating to adjacencies. When we first started this discussion several months back, one of the things that was highlighted was the desire to have the community space really facing the river.
Yes.
And be river fronted. And that while it couldn't be done initially at the beginning phases of the project, that there was a general enthusiasm for the idea of connecting by, a walkway path or something like that. What happens, over by the library and the Swan Pond area by trail over to the swinging bridge so that people can enhance walkability in the community. The idea being, could we then have a terrace and an entrance, from that side? What I see in all of these plans is, there's no lobby or community entrance way, a common entrance way to access both the public safety, functions and then the community space from that walkable pedestrian thing, which will be coming in the future.
Okay.
So all I see at the main level is, the utilitarian, and necessary public safety, but is it necessary there? Can it be reconfigured? I feel that, the community really does need to identify with and feel that this space is their space and it's being planned for them as part of this. Yes, public safety is definitely part of that. But if we have to sacrifice a gym, which I know the community also would like, we need to be more intentional with the design so that we are making it clear from the outset that yes, this is for you too. And here's what we're doing for you as part of this. So I would be okay passing on the gym. I think it would be more economical for us, obviously, to not do that. But I really would encourage looking at, you know, having the initial plan contemplate that pathway, that terrace, that welcoming aspect for pedestrians
Okay.
in the community.
Thank you for that. If I may, just to reflect and make sure I understand the comment. We are showing a public lobby space from the street side in the plan. So you're referring specifically
To the riverside.
to the riverside and how that could potentially happen. That's absolutely something that can be explored. You know, I want to emphasize that this is a planning exercise, but it is still very high level. We want to make sure the square footages are right, the adjacencies are right, and that it becomes an overall project from a high level that the entire village can get behind. But that's something that we certainly can continue to study and see what effects it has. I have no argument with that goal whatsoever.
Okay, I very much appreciate it. Thank you.
Manager Francis.
So if I may, so the path has been discussed in the past, when Williams initially did some iterations quite some time ago, when we first started the discussion. And most recently, we have engaged Burke Engineering to kind of give us a cost estimate. And essentially, the recommendation is get the building built, and then you can try to get grants, because Orion was estimating in today's dollars that can be anywhere from 1.5 to 2.5 million, depending on what it looks like, how it's set up, different stabilization by the riverfront, things of that sort. So I just wanted the board to be aware of that particular piece. So it's something that we're aware of, that the board has mentioned, but also community feedback too.
That's great. I didn't want this to get lost as a concept as we were, you know, preparing the next steps.
Well, when we were discussing whether to retrofit the building or start anew, my opinion was start anew. Why have staff in a subpar part of the building and other staff using brand-new facilities? We should be all brand new. An extension of that would be if there is a more logical and better layout for public safety departments, then I'm in favor of that.
Even if it means losing the gym, at least from this plan.
Yes.
Trustee Evans.
I agree, both with Trustee Marshazga and Trustee Mateo. You know, if the fitness room, it sounds like there is gonna be a trade-off for the fitness room that might not, it might be more valuable to make the RPD and RFD facilities. I think that we should put more resources into the RFD and RPD facilities. And if that means losing our gym, I think that's okay. It's not like we don't have gyms that are accessible around town, all the schools. All of the kids use the gyms, both in school and after school. My kids played basketball in the school gyms. You know, maybe we could put resources into fixing up some of the facilities we have outside already, and just put our focus on there. As long as it still has that there is a community feel, so when you walk in the building, it doesn't feel so, you know, like a professional building. It should feel like a community building. I don't think you need a fitness room to have something nice like that for people to enjoy.
Thank you.
Is the fitness room that's being planned for public use, or is it just the fitness room that we currently have for fire and public safety?
These, the larger fitness room would be, actually, all of these are shown as potential public use.
Okay. So even the one in option D could be potential public use with the size of it? Well, I don't think it's going to come as a surprise to anybody that I feel very strongly that we need the gym and the space. Again, spending 10 years on Parks and Rec where we have been scrambling to find space, where we've had to, I mean, we're talking about spending a lot of money. Well, we already have spent a lot of money talking about facilities and the things that we have for Parks and Rec. And I'm sure they're going to come up with recommendations based on that. And I can already say with a lot of confidence that none of those recommendations are going to be able to be realized given the current situation of our facilities. We have already, at this point, been faced with having to cut popular programs within Parks and Recreation because we don't have gym space. The public schools are using their gyms all the time. They have more and more sports, which is great. They have more and more sports. They are using it for their own uses. Same with the private schools. I know I work for a private school in Riverside, and I can't even get the gym space, and I work there because the school is using the gym space. We do not have adequate space for recreation, indoor recreation in this town. I would also say that I think that in order to sell doing this to the public, as much as I know, and I am supportive and wanting to do this for our public safety, I think that there are a lot of people who will say, what's in it for me? We're going to spend millions of dollars, what's in it for me? And to be honest, I think that there's some nice things in option D, but I would say that probably 90% of the village will never go in option D. They just won't have a reason to. Maybe they'll have a meeting there if they go to meetings. But to be honest, I think that the public spaces that are being proposed in option D are not public spaces that are really needed right now. We have meeting spaces. We have places to do those things. What we don't have is recreation space. That, I mean, again, I'm also thinking from the standpoint of the board allocated a lot of money to do the Parks and Recreation assessment, which will come with recommendations. And to me, it would be frustrating to get recommendations and have people in the village give feedback about what they're looking for village amenities, and to have to say, yeah, sorry, we can't do any of these things, we just don't have the space for it. And I feel like that's kind of where we're going with this, with the first presentation that we had, is a lot of the things that they're going to suggest we're going to not have an option for. Because I've already seen it as we've tried to find space for the programs we have, let alone programs we would like to have. So I also think that, you know, when I'm talking to people about spending millions of dollars on a building, and maybe, I don't know, maybe this needs to be asked of the villagers, but I feel like there are a lot of people that would rather spend millions of extra dollars to get these public spaces than spending millions of dollars for a building that most people won't use.
Manager Francis, or before we move on, I just want,
Trustee Clarity.
I'm sorry, go ahead, Trustee Clarity.
Thank you, I appreciate it. I agree completely with Trustee Marsh-Osga in the sense that the community needs this space to feel like it is for them. And what I see here in these options, I don't see enough for the community. So frankly, at the price tag we're talking about, I don't think we have community support. I don't think a small community room and a community kitchen cuts it in terms of what the community is going to be looking for in this price tag. I also agree completely with everything Trustee Cost said. Our community is sorely lacking in adequate gym space. I'd be happy to discuss sacrificing some of the other space allocations that were made for the community to trade those for the gym space. I think the gym space is a priority. I do understand our public safety space is currently suboptimal, and so I don't want to engage in a project where we are creating an additional, just newer suboptimal space for them. But I also think we need to be realistic that there are sacrifices that have to be made in the community in which we live. We have small spaces. We can't have a massive new building in this space, and so we are going to have to make some sacrifices. But I think we need to speak for the residents here and get input from the residents. And my personal belief, after having spoken with a lot of them on this over many, many years, is that we do not have community support for what's being proposed.
Manager Francis or Director Malchiodi, could you address the demand for additional gym space? And are we cutting programs? Are we seeing a significant loss of participation because of the lack of gym space?
It's a challenge. We've been creative over the years. We have a good partnership with District 96. We did have to go outside of District 96 at times to use local gyms. What we have now, partnering with District 96, we use local churches. That's the way we've always operated. The gymnasium, while it would certainly be a benefit to the department and the community, we could certainly program it. We have adequate gym space now, but that's at the current demand. It's hard to say what it could be in the future. And we're never really going to get out of the gym rental business just because of peak demand hours. So while we could do a lot, we could do expansion of programming, additional programming in a gym, we would still be working with local schools and local churches just because one gym wouldn't be enough for those peak demand hours. So we would always kind of be in that business. Our volleyball program was on hiatus for a little bit because the gym we were using, St. Hugh and Lions, they had turnover of ownership, but we brought that back to the Presbyterian Church currently.
Thank you. Other comment, Trustee Evans?
Yes. So I disagree with the idea that there would be less support for new police and fire facilities if we don't add a gym. And I also disagree with the comments that there is nothing for the community with this plan. I think it's going to depend on what the vision is for the community room itself. There's a roof terrace planned. It's a 1,750 square foot room, which is not tiny. And also, I think in alignment with what Director Malchiodi was saying, the space that we would be reserving for fitness isn't really a whole lot of space that's going to resolve all of our problems. I wasn't aware that we were short on program space. We had purchased a building just a few years ago to accommodate space issues. And we did do a survey, we can't forget about the park survey that we've just completed, where we did learn what their priorities were for, space planning. And I want to say that trails and outdoor space was a priority.
Thank you. Trustee Gallegos, anything to add?
I would just say that good health is the best investment anyone can ever make. However, we have to set priorities here, so I would not sacrifice public safety space for a gym or other recreational facilities in this case. There are probably other possibilities that we can come up with, probably private sector possibilities that could also come up into play as well. But public safety is always a governmental responsibility.
So,
Wait, may I ask a question?
sure.
For a project like this, this and a price tag like this, can the board and the staff proceed, or at some point do we need, like, how do we fund this? Do we need community to approve it?
So, yeah.
Referendum, is this a?
So this would, sorry. So this would be a referendum. The reason why we were using the $20 million figure is because what communities have is called legal debt margin or legal debt limit. And so basically, based on your EAV, it's all formula based. And so we've got some other outstanding debt, kind of gives us how much we feel comfortable issuing in debt. And so that's where that $20 million number came from, because you don't want to issue all of your debt, because then if you need to issue more debt in the future, you don't have that opportunity because now it's taken up with bonds. And so essentially for a $20 million bond, you'd have to pay for that over a 20-year span. It's pretty significant. And so the other options, well, certainly you could probably, the village could pull for some other resources that would be non-referendum debt, such as, you know, you have the IRMA balance that we've built up over the past 10 years. You have your limited tax debt that's non-voter referendum debt that you can issue as well. And so you have some other options, but those buckets are much smaller. For example, the IRMA is only 1.6 million. It's a lot of money, but it's only 1.6 million. Your limited tax debt, I believe, is approximately 1.25 million, 1.5 million, and this is strictly going off of memory. So I think it's in that ballpark. And so now when you're looking at those collectively, it's right around a little over $3 million. And so you have all these other pieces that you're still looking at funding. If you're doing it in the phased approach, you have to wait for the majority of your debt service for the first phase to be paid off in order to free up your legal debt margin or legal debt limit to issue additional bonds to finish up those different pieces. So nowhere in time could the village say we want to issue $50 million in debt, because you don't have the ability to do that within the state of Illinois, because your EAV is not high enough to do that.
So if I understand, we are meant to go through this process, come up with the recommended plan, and then take it to referendum?
That would be the only way in order to do a facility for.
Is it possible at some point to do an interim step? I guess what I'm getting at is we are doing the thoughtful, good work here that we should be doing, but we are spending a lot of time and resources on this project without a lot of indication whether the community would support any sort of facility at the price tag that we're talking about. Is there an I mean, I really don't want to subject our community to yet another survey, but is there an interim step where we are able to get at least feedback or some sense on whether the community will support this? I just candidly, I do believe our public service needs better facilities. I really, truly do. I just think it's very difficult. It'll be very difficult to get that past the referendum, even at half the price tag.
I believe that we could do an advisory referendum of some sort, right?
That's correct, a
Pretty much.
non-binding advisory referendum, which could be.
Non-binding advisory referendum. The challenge with that is, how do you ask the question? Because it has to be a yes or no question, correct?
Right, so typically you'd ask, you know, do you want to, you'd have to describe it in a way, and so it's an informed decision. So it's something we would want to talk about, and but they ultimately have to say yes or no, so you'd have to phrase it in such a way that it informs.
You can't ask either or.
Correct.
So, and that's a challenge. So, but I wanted to add a couple of my perspectives. One is enhanced public safety is the greatest public benefit we can give our community. With the facilities we have, recruitment's going to be challenging in the future, already is. Our reason for being is to provide public safety to this community. So I appreciate the thoughts that, yes, the residents will want more, but I have faith that the residents will recognize the importance of the public safety aspect of it too. Also, I'm looking at the numbers. For around $20 million, we can do, maybe a little bit more, we can do the public safety, public safety facilities, with some space, not a lot, but some space for Parks and Recreation, you know, commercial kitchen. They could have kitchen classes, cooking classes, things like that, cooking clubs, a state-of-the-art community room with high-tech video, high technology, which we don't have, which we desperately need. That would be available for meetings as well as community groups can use it. You know, we do have a challenge. I was meeting with the chamber the other night in this room, and they were always struggling to find a proper space to meet. So those aspects, and with the Riverside, the trail, the Riverside access, you know, I find that very attractive. So the difference is about $25 to $30 million is what this gym's going to cost us, and a little bit of sacrifice on the functionality of public safety. Not a lot, maybe, but a little bit. For $25, $30 million, we could probably find another site to build a gym. Probably less than that, I'm guessing. So if we don't include the gym, and what I'm hearing from the majority of you right now is not to include the gym. If we don't include it, doesn't mean we won't ever do a gym. We could still keep that on the table and keep that, direct our staff to research, and I've had some conversations with Manager Francis about this. It just means that we're not going to do it here if that's the direction we want to go. So,
if I may, I think as I'm reflecting on what I'm hearing and what I know is the next step in the Barry Dunn process, my understanding is that the Parks and Rec Master Plan process will result in some more specific recommendations of spaces, given what we've learned about conditions and what my partner, Mr. Parisi, presented tonight. And my suggestion would be, if those results, those findings will come soon, to revisit that option D with a lens on how well those spaces could meet those stated needs. You have the opportunity here to synchronize these two processes to align as many needs as possible. It may not be all of them, but it may be some. So at least wherever this goes, you would have the ability to say, yes, we studied our park and recreation facility needs, we've studied these space needs, and we are moving in alignment, even if it's not everything. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Can I ask just another question, going back to what Trustee Mateo asked last time? So the recommended space needed for public safety was 32,000. When you showed us option C, it was down to 26,000, and in option D, it's down to 22,000 square feet. Are we? I understand that we're looking at the $20 million price tag, but as we're talking about any community space within this new building, are we truly meeting the needs, or are we being short-sighted in our public safety space at 22,000?
I believe that would be okay. To reflect on the question that I clarified for Trustee Mateo in the last meeting, we developed our space recommendations as a series of ranges. The low being around 26,000, the high being around 39,000. So what we initially presented was the midpoint. And when it became clear, knowing this budget, sort of that budget cap that you're up against, we sought to look for solutions that would work within that dollar figure. How can we get this whole project done? So does going from that 26,000 to 22,000 create some sacrifices in space? It absolutely does. It is, however, significantly more space than the departments have now, and higher quality space. And I do believe that we would find a way to make it meet the needs of Chief Buckley's two departments at that range. I would be hesitant to go much lower than that without truthfully being able to say this will mean some sacrifice in terms of the amount of space needed.
Yeah, I'm just concerned that, I'm just concerned about going below the bottom of your recommended space, 26,000 being the recommended. Going below the bottom, are we being short-sighted on this by doing that? Because if we're going to, I mean, it's $20 million, and if we're doing this, I don't want to do this if we're not doing it right.
So for our discussions going forward, can we get a sense for what might be sacrificed? And maybe it's generic sacrifices?
Yeah, I think there's a couple things moving forward. Certainly, if we have recommendations for facility needs out of the study, we'd want to show you how that could potentially work. And then what you're saying, to your question, what does 22,000 square feet get us? We can absolutely revisit that program, speak with staff, and then update with you with what we find and what challenges come out of that. To be very honest, we did not get into a specific room-by-room reduction of that. It was just a percentage to see where we needed to be at a budget level that Manager Francis mentioned. So we can absolutely program that and provide additional detail as to what that space would entail.
And could that summary also address whether, so I assume option C, with at least phase 1 and 2, had room for expansion of new equipment or new hires or something. To what extent will we not have that if we go down to 22,000? So if that can be addressed, I'd appreciate that.
I'm hearing the majority of trustees saying that they're inclined not to include the gym, not calling that a definitive final answer by any means. But I heard 4 of you say that. There was also a very good question raised. Do you want to, does the board have interest in some type of advisory referendum?
I don't even think we're ready for that at this point.
Yeah.
Would it be possible to get another iteration of this, rough, space use proposal that does orient the community, a community-based entrance off of the riverfront beforehand, and then we can bring that maybe in a survey form to the community along with the, other options, just to say what, kind of read the temperature on what people are thinking regarding this. I mean, it would be kind of a way to engage more directly and just say this is the, we would have to issue bonds for this either way. Here's one option, here's another option. What do you think? Kind of.
I think we could certainly flesh out this option D a little bit more, right?
Absolutely.
In terms of the riverfront access and all that. I'm not sure, again, how we, surveys and advisory referendums are great, but surveys, one, you get a very low response rate. Even advisory referendums, you get a relatively low response rate, so they're never definitive. I know from experience on this board, when they're in someone's favor, they say, that's a great survey. When they're not in someone's favor, it's not enough people voted.
Yeah.
So, it's kind of a double-edged sword there, but I think we certainly can flesh it out some more. Maybe that's where we end this tonight.
I think that's where we're headed, and what I would speak from experience in all of our project types in the communities we work in, including next door in Brookfield. If you're eventually potentially headed towards a question with voters, they will need more information than these diagrams to make those decisions. So there would be beyond diagrams, there would expect to be a concept or even a potential couple concepts to workshop with the community, try to get consensus and get feedback well before anything potentially even goes to voters. That would be the goal, and that's typically a successful process when you understand the opposition, the pain points, where everybody is before you make that decision as a board. That's the process that we've seen be most successful. So I'm hearing continue to see if there's ways to improve option D to accomplish some of the things we're talking about, provide more detail on what 22,000 square feet of public safety space would entail, and align, as I said, see what alignment we get with the community space we are able to provide with Barry Dunn's recommendations. Okay.
Good.
Anything further?
No, I just have another question related to what Aberdeen was saying is, does the library, the village hall, none of those spaces have riverfront access, right? You have to go around to the main entrance of the library, and the village hall, you have to go around to the main entrance.
For public access?
Yes.
Yeah. So, okay.
Well, even for the township hall, there's one in the back, but it's not riverfront access. It's obstructed. And even the youth center doesn't have any staff access from the riverside.
Okay. Well, I mean, I was just, trying to understand that.
So I think we have direction. Anyone else before we move on?
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Just very briefly, if we were to do option C and get to phase 3, how long from now would that be, given our constraints on the bond?
I'd have to talk with our financial advisor. I mean, if you're doing quick math, it's going to be well over 40 years, depending on, because it would be multiple referendums. As debt runs off, you go to a referendum again. So unless there is an accumulation of surpluses, while our team's really great at, making the dollar stretch, I can't imagine that we'd have that type of abundance. But in the same direction, though, we will, as we're going through this process, we're compiling a list of potential grant opportunities in which we could apply for. And now let me be clear, there's no grant specific for facilities. And so it's those other things that you look at that will be incorporated as part of the facility that maybe helps to offset some of the costs, but it's going to be nowhere near the price tag that we're looking at.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. I appreciate your feedback tonight.
Next on our agenda is continued discussion on noise ordinance revisions. Assistant Village Manager Monroe will present this.
Good evening. We've had plenty of discussion so far, so I will be brief and be able to respond to a lot of different questions as you have them. Essentially, what we are asking is whether the village should alter our current noise ordinances as they pertain to construction and landscaping hours. We left the conversation with some dialogue about what resources the village could use, if there are seasonal or annual restrictions to different types of equipment they use for landscaping. So gas-powered, electric-powered, there's a variety of choices out on the market, and there's something to be said about individuals and contractors making a transition to kind of a quieter, less pollutant option for landscaping equipment. Because there were a couple of questions about this, I will just note the things that I've added into the same, relatively the same memo as the previously presented memo because of some of the questions that I was asked. I'll just note that The prior agenda item didn't address the polluting measure of gas-powered equipment. It certainly is a factor that's been identified by regional groups that are advocating for a transition to cleaner equipment. It's not something that I would consider part of our ordinance itself, but certainly could be mentioned within, our purpose for making a change if you want to do that. Another thing is that this is a first step in a conversation, so it can be phased. There's not a specific rush or need to do this immediately, but it is something that communities are acting on, and there are multiple regional efforts to make change on both a residential and a commercial basis. And lastly, I'll note that there were some questions about, what impacts there are on businesses and what our experience is with, for example, licensing our contractors and other things. There have been some conversations held in River Forest, for example. They held a hearing. Feedback most recently from contractors is that it's challenging to make a transition. The cost is high. They need extra batteries. They're prevented from working in certain municipalities with electric equipment because they have to reserve it for those that have enacted some of these ordinances to date. Regional groups are trying to find opportunities to get grants or further study this issue. So Metropolitan Mayor's Caucus, C4, there are groups that are working actively on this to provide municipal toolkits and get grant funding for commercial entities to make a transition. So it's still very much in flux, and that's why I say it's a phased thing if we choose, because changes can happen in the market and other things. So because of the conversation and kind of where it led, I created a couple of different options that we could just discuss very briefly, and ultimately it lands on, if you could flip it one, Ethan, one more. So if there's a desire to make any changes to our noise ordinances as it pertains to landscaping equipment, we have just a couple of options to consider. If we don't make any changes, everything just stays the same. That's option A. Option B identifies whether we would restrict hours for uses of all equipment types. So I did make examples of these, so I'll revisit, and implement a contractor registration for 2025. Items B, C, and D all would require us moving to licensing our landscapers. Currently, we have 48 licensed contractors, and that's because we have a requirement for any hardscape and grading activities in town. There are more companies that focus specifically on just maintenance, right? So a trustee had listed several of them saying, are these registered? And 6 to 7 of the dozen or so are not on our list, so we would have to work to license those. Other communities that do license, there are not very many that I've found in our region, but at least 4 or 5 do. And in the ones that have a public list, again, there's another 20 or so that aren't on our list. So we're looking at, adding a bunch of registrations over the course of a year, and it takes community education, both to the residents and the businesses, and knowing what that approach is, right? Some communities are punitive right away, others use it as an education opportunity and just want people to register so we know that they have insurance as they're doing work in town. So C would be restricting hours for the use of certain equipment types and implement the registration. So the examples will clarify. And then D is just a start with registering our landscape contractors, ramping up our community education. There were comments about that at the previous discussions. And then strictly enforcing our hours of operation, right? So there were comments earlier about the the level or quantity of noise, and it's hard to measure that, right? Everybody individually experiences this differently. But this option would just be to enforce those hours. So flip it one more time, Ethan. Well, I was asked for clarification on some of the examples. So option B provides us with a lot of different flexible ways of doing this, right? We could restrict or ban the use of equipment to specific hours, right? We have read hours of 7 a.m. to 7 p.m., 8 p.m., and I'm sorry, yeah. 7 a.m. to 8 p.m., 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. on Saturdays, and then 9 a.m. to 5 on Sundays for residents, okay? We could change those hours. Or we could restrict or ban the use of gas-powered equipment to specific times of year. Commonly, municipalities are doing this in the summer months, right? Allowing a return of the leaf blowers in the fall cleanup time. And then we also have an option to limit contracted work within a set hour, regardless of whatever fuels they're using. Option C was just it's strictly for a modification of our hours, okay? So it would be, if you have a gas-powered equipment, then you're restricted to a set number of hours during the day. It doesn't mean you can't do work in your yard, but it would limit the use of that particular equipment type during set hours. So just wanted a sense of would the board like to take any actions on this? Would you like us to prepare any contractor registration programs? And then more specifically, if there's any particular mode or option you prefer, I can answer any questions.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you.
Trustees, questions?
Is this just about leaf blowers, or do lawnmowers
So
fall into this?
we can specify.
Okay.
It's been it's been mixed. So most often people are designated leaf blowers because of the higher decibel
Are they just
levels.
a lot louder than lawnmowers?
It's the pitch and
okay.
the decibel rating of leaf blowers that tend to be that very like grindy, and lawnmowers are very, they can be loud, but they're at a lower decibel level.
Okay.
So.
I have a question. What is the purpose of registering the contractors? Is it just so you have a place to send a ticket if there's an enforcement issue?
That's part of it. Generally, we license all of our building and construction contractors because we want to make sure they're properly bonded and insured, right? We're protecting village property. We're ensuring that if they're doing damages to private property, that we have a record of those insurances, right? There's some level of protection for whoever's using that service. And so in this case, for landscapers, it would serve a similar purpose, right? If they're doing, they're doing work and they're continually tearing up our village parkways or pulling into somebody's driveway or leaving a bunch of mud on the street or whatever it is, they're identifiable. So we can provide it. Maybe the first step is a warning or a warning letter. It doesn't automatically mean that we need to cite them, but it certainly is a tool that we can use if people are continually not following procedure. So
Have we had issues with that? And corollary to that, aside from the registration, you still could cite them or issue a ticket, right? The only thing you couldn't do is withdraw their license if we didn't have a licensure program.
yeah, and we do if there are instances where we're aware that that any contractor has come in and performed work or done something that's caused a disturbance to residents. For example, if there's dumpster hauling or early work that we can identify a contractor that's violating other, or the village codes we have, we can send them a citation. Often what happens Two is that because of the work hours observed by landscaping companies or potentially trucks and things, there may not be labels on all of the contractor vehicles. We may not be working those particular hours, but if there's some more information, then we at least know who to talk to, even if we're not giving them a ticket. Oh, and as far as landscaping issues, it's not that frequent. We do have our code enforcement officer go out, and when he's making rounds, he'll provide like the education information that we put together a couple of years ago, and things like parking on the street or blowing leaves out in the street, and but as far as managing and enforcing the noise itself is more challenging because we have to be there and be able to observe it.
So by extension, you see it lists 3 communities that license landscapers. So the vast majority of those that you surveyed do not. And so if they're putting in bans or regulations on leaf blowers, they're relying on education.
They're relying on education, and they are relying on their public safety officers to respond.
And Oak Park, Glencoe, Lincolnwood, do you have any memory of how slowly they phased in these leaf blower or gas-powered equipment restrictions?
I don't have a good time frame for when exactly. I know that they either gave several months to a year. The River Forest just most recently had a discussion. They brought forward an ordinance with more stipulations in it than they're considering recommending to the board at this point. What they've suggested, their Sustainability Commission that reviewed it is suggesting that commercial contractors that are responsible for leaf blowing, if they commit to using electric equipment by January of this year and use it in 2025, that they'll be waived essentially their registration fees for registering as a contractor. If they commit and then they violate that, then they would end up paying a fee of $250, and then anybody who is, I should show this, 2026 and every subsequent year after, they would need to all commit to only leaf blowers year-round and would receive that benefit. So it's not in their code yet. This is just what's being proposed to their own village board within the upcoming months.
I have a question. All right, so you said that gas leaf blowers have a higher decibel than lawnmowers. What's the decibel difference between gas leaf blowers and snow blowers?
We do have in our, I may need to get back to you, there was a diagram included in one of the previous packets that has kind of a list of generally the gas-powered equipment, and so there's just the levels where it demonstrates that leaf blowers are basically at the top of that, towards the top of that list, along with, air, jet engine kind of volume levels for intensity of volume.
And that's commercial equipment, right?
Yeah, commercial equipment. Some other factors that were mentioned by contractors is just not only the cost of the equipment, but one of the reasons perhaps some of the municipalities are opting for allowing these during fall cleanup is just the volume of materials, and that they're saying the available in market electric is not able to really handle the volume of fall leaf cleanup. And so it's just a commentary from people who are using these on a regular basis commercially.
And we are a village in a forest with a lot of trees, aren't we?
Trustee Evans?
Yeah, so I feel like we're jumping all over, and we have a nice memo that you wrote with the questions. And I thought during the meeting that we would sort of be going through that so that we can talk every aspect out. I don't know if we're gonna do that tonight, but I feel like we're missing a lot. We're just sort of jumping around. Wondering if we could do a more organized discussion.
So do you want to address the question specifically?
Yeah, if we want to flip back one more. Okay. So this generally is saying what resources is the village willing to use? The memo lays out, the amount of staff time is not insignificant. It will take us several hours, to prepare materials, to have our staff understand, to create communications, and then to actually do the level of enforcement that would help people understand whatever the new requirements would be. There's also an added staff resource necessary for license processing. As I've mentioned, the number of licensed contractors, I would anticipate, wouldn't jump to unmanageable levels, but it is, it is something that we would have to do. It'd take a couple hours, for every new contractor, it just depends. It could take 10 minutes, it could take a day to get what you need. So any feedback?
Yeah, so one thing I've been wondering, and maybe this is like too much in the weeds with logistics, but, people have a hard time lining up a landscaper. Sometimes they don't get a call back, especially at the beginning of summer.
Yeah.
And so they find their own landscaper, and so then will it be their responsibility to tell the landscaper they have to register first? How are we gonna do this? How are we gonna force people? Are we gonna say you can't hire anyone outside of our list?
Well, we do try to have that be the experience when we're doing building permits, right? You should be, if you're planning to do any kind of building project, then the expectation is that the contractor is registering with the village so that we can check those things. So, we would definitely be open to relying on this period of education, but if there's been significant communication to everybody we can think of, if we're blanketing our contractors and saying, hey, there's a requirement to register if you're working in Riverside, it should also, I think, be an awareness by the residents that they should have a contractor that's registered. You can't make them, but
Yeah.
if we're aware, then we would try to reach out to them and communicate that.
I have a question.
Yeah.
How would you differentiate? Oh, Megan, go ahead.
Thanks, sorry, hard to jump in this format. I'll just say, I haven't heard a compelling reason for registration and licensure here. This board did discuss these issues a couple years back. You mentioned that. I think the education program has worked. I'm not hearing that it's a tremendous problem, that we're receiving complaints, or that we're having trouble enforcing, so I'm not sure the juice is worth the squeeze on it.
Well, I was going to ask, how would you differentiate a regular commercial landscaper versus a high school or a college student who does it on the side part-time and just has a truck with no name on there?
I understand where you're going with that, and we would have to define it. So if we don't currently define commercial versus, but there's examples of that. So if you said you're doing this for pay and you have 2 or more, pieces of equipment or branding or whatever it is, I know that if you have a group of high school students that are doing this for their business, are they then needing the insurance and other landscaping? Is it likened more to a lemonade stand, or is it likened to a professional business? And so we would have to determine that.
Okay.
Yeah.
So is there any interest from the board in registration and licensing of landscape contractors?
Oh, everything has a...
I actually do have an interest in registering them, and I think it's twofold, not just, in relationship to, leaf blowers and, construction noise, which we've received dozens of complaints of over the years. It's an insurance piece too. It really, when contractors, come in with heavy equipment, and whether it's, village sidewalks or village trees that are damaged in, the process, there is not any means necessarily of determining, which contractor is being used and who did it and when. So I just feel that there's a value to making sure that everybody who's operating with heavy equipment within this village, that we have a way of getting in touch with them, knowing who they are, making sure they're insured. I think it's important for the protection of residents and for village property.
On its face, I think it's. Go
Trustee
ahead.
Clarity.
Have we had a lot of damage? Have we had, instances really where trees and sidewalks have been damaged and we couldn't find the responsible party? I mean, are we able to quantify this as a problem?
By landscapers? By construction workers, yes. I don't know about landscapers.
From a department that receives complaints about these types of issues, there have not been, reported incidents of damages to property from landscaping companies. So we do get that from building contractors. Most of the time they're doing water sewer projects or driveways or other things, but, it's not been reported.
Manager Francis.
Thank you. Probably, and I don't know if it's happened at all this year, but historically, what we'll get complaints about with landscapers is them blowing leaves into the street, or more interestingly, into the village's green spaces, which then create more work for our Public Works Department.
And to track down who did that.
Without licensing, you can't.
Right, and even if they were registered, could we say it was that particular landscaper that day? To what extent would having them licensed really help our enforcement? Or ticketing?
I agree. I think I like the educational approach of trying to educate residents and having residents speak to landscapers or encourage people to hire landscapers that are using electric as opposed to gas powered. I don't want to spend village resources on licensing. I would love to educate people and talk to them about, moving towards electrical equipment. If your lawnmower fails, if your leaf blower fails, please, consider buying electric. That to me seems like a better use of time, especially if we're talking about changing restrictions and stuff. We're also talking about increasing enforcement, right? And I don't think that I am for using our public safety for this kind of enforcement at this point. I would rather work with people on educating and hopefully getting them to come to the conclusion that this is what they want and this is where they're headed. I would much rather do that than worry about changing ordinances and that kind of thing for this purpose.
And everyone who's doing hardscape is licensed with us.
Right.
Right.
Yes, they should be doing that. And for the most part, we get compliance. If we end up finding a permitted project, we address it, so.
Yeah, when we go through this process, I want to make sure we're not trying to fix something that isn't broken. I think we started talking about gas-powered tools, and now it's sort of grown into something where we want to manage every single landscaper that comes to town, and also tell residents that they have to get their landscaper registered. And it's just going to create a lot of just logistics that maybe we aren't required, 'cause we're fine right now. But I do understand the need to have contact so that you can educate.
Yes.
Is it possible to truncate the hours of, operation of these things without contractor registration? I mean, that relieves the staff of an administrative burden to not have to go through the extra registration step if it relieves residents of a dialogue with their, that's potentially uncomfortable with can we just jump right in and reduce those hours? Because I'm serious, I have received so many complaints about leaf blowers.
It's not a necessary component. We felt like it was an effective measure to complement that, but if, we want to just change the hours, then we can do our best to educate and enforce, as needed, essentially, with a change in hours.
Manager Francis.
Thank you. The greater problem, while there is the administrative task, is these violations are not going to occur when our code enforcement officer is in the office or Ashley or any of our team is. It's going to fall on public safety, who does not have the resources to go on these calls. And so therefore, hence the registration piece was then staff could get the information from dispatch and then follow up the following Monday. If there is no registration component, then our dispatch center is getting the call, and it's a lesser priority call, so officers will get there when they get to it, but more than likely landscaper's gone. And so then we're in this vicious cycle of we have this ordinance that we can't fully execute because we don't have the resources to do it. I speak from experience simply for the fact that I worked in Glencoe when they did the registration for the landscapers, and it was for those that were doing snow removal as well. They did a rotation of every few years. It was a registration for like a 3-year registration. Wasn't a lot of discussion about kiddos doing snow removal or landscaping, so that wasn't really an issue. But it was really down to the enforcement, and they actually had a community service, so they allocated additional resources to basically handle those enforcement pieces. And that comes at a cost. So I just wanted to.
Resources?
What was that?
Do we have those additional resources?
Yeah. Yeah.
They're the primary enforcement of this. They enforce it all week, and they do have more officers than we do.
I mean, who's enforcing it now? How would it be any different?
Well, if right now, if my thought is they probably wouldn't be getting the same volume of calls for if people are landscaping. Typically, they're getting calls of this person doesn't have a permit, and it's on a Saturday. Then officers will go out, and typically because they're on a construction site, that's usually when they're getting a call. They're still out there, and so PD will knock on the door, tell them they need to stop, then report it to Ashley and Rob, and then Rob will follow up with them the following day in which they're in the office. This is a little different because when you're dealing with landscapers, they're only there for a set period of time, and then they're gone. And so that really becomes the challenge of it all.
So it's getting late.
I was waiting for that.
Yeah. 9 o'clock, the witching hour. Do you want to continue this discussion or take a pause? Because we do have other business tonight.
I think we take a pause at the very least.
We can take a pause tonight, but I
Yeah.
do want to get through it.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I think the issue to think about is registration, pros and cons. And I think the other thing that drove this to begin with was gas-powered leaf blowers.
Right.
And so if we could just answer those two questions at an upcoming board meeting, I think everything else will kind of fall into place.
We have time for that, right? I mean, it's not like they're going to.
Yeah. I mean, people are using leaf blowers right now, but they won't be for much longer. and they won't be again till the spring. So unless someone else has something else they want to add, we'll continue this discussion to be determined board meeting. Is that?
Yeah,
Yeah,
we'll have to
okay.
look at our
Yeah.
schedule.
So,
Okay, thank you
Very
very
good.
much.
Thank you.
We'll simplify the memo and can use this as a resource. Thank you.
I think the next item on the agenda can be handled pretty quickly. A resolution authorizing the execution of an intergovernmental agreement between the Village of Riverside and the City of Berwyn that provides for the housing and processing of the Riverside Police Department arrestees at the City of Berwyn Police Department facility. Director Buckley.
Thank you, President Pollock, trustees, Manager Francis. Thank you for allowing me to bring this resolution before you. As President Pollock just said, this is an agreement between Riverside and Berwyn to house our prisoners for processing as well as possible transport also. So back in 2019, the village board entered into an intergovernmental agreement with the village of North Riverside to provide housing and processing for our arrestees. This intergovernmental agreement was a result of our merging of our dispatch centers, which then became West Central Consolidated Communications Center, otherwise known as WC3. Recently, we were notified by North Riverside that they will no longer be able to provide for this service of the prisoner housing at their facility. So staff immediately started looking for other alternatives and options. But due to the location of some of these other options, as well as the ability to meet the needs of the Riverside Police Department, they were not viable options for us. So police staff at the time toured the Berwyn Police Department facility and discussed the services that Berwyn could provide in terms of processing, detaining our prisoners, and transporting, or potentially transporting our prisoners also. The Berwyn Police Department is in close proximity to the Village of Riverside. They also have trained and certified lockup personnel that monitor individuals detained, which alleviates Riverside officers from having to do that. This will substantially decrease the amount of time that our officers spend processing and checking on detainees. Brookfield was part of this original agreement with WC3 and the Village of North Riverside back in 2019. They, along with the Village of McCook, who is also a member of WC3, have recently done similar IGAs with Berwyn and are currently housing any of their detainees or prisoners at the Berwyn Police Department. If you look at the chart on the wall, I'll just touch base real quick with our expenses so far that we've had with North Riverside since 2019. We average between $2,500 to $2,700 a year to house prisoners, and that we have to pay for meals also. Per the agreement with the City of Berwyn, they will charge us $125 per arrestee that is detained and held at the Berwyn Police Department facility, and then $20 per arrestee that is processed and released. So two different things, and I'm going to show you the charts next to that. Those tables illustrate the number of arrestees that we actually detain, which basically means we hold them overnight and they go for a bond hearing in the morning, compared with the arrestees that we bring in, we process them, take their fingerprints, and we release them right away. So we did our roundabout numbers over the last couple of years to see approximately how many arrestees we have per year. And it's approximately 50 arrestees per year that spend the night and go for a bond hearing in the morning, and approximately 270 that are detained and released. Doing some rough numbers, those detainees that stay with us, it would cost us about $6,250 annually. And to process prisoners, Berwyn would charge us $20 per arrest without detention, which would be around $540 annually. So in fiscal year 2025, we budgeted around $7,000 to help pay for these services. So at this time, staff recommends approval of this agreement based on the limited options and the minimal budgetary impact that it will have.
Thank you. Questions for Chief Buckley?
No, I read it and I was largely in favor of it, so I'm good with it.
Trustee Evans?
Do you have any idea how long this agreement would be in place? Is it more sustainable than, so I don't really want to have to go through it and do this every couple of years, I'm sure you.
I agree, because to be honest with you, there really aren't any other options out there. This agreement will stay in place according to our agreement with Berwyn until either one of us decides not to have it anymore.
And also, I haven't been paying attention, or maybe we haven't discussed it, but do our plans for the new facilities include our own jail?
No, and the reason why it does not, so Illinois Department of Correction is the department that monitors housing for prisoners. For us to be able to do that, we would have to have 24-hour personnel on site, which is why we moved it to North Riverside in the first place, because once we lost our dispatch center here, we did not have 24-hour personnel on site. So if we decided to do that here at Riverside, we would have to build that facility, which they're very expensive to build, number one. And number two, we would also have to hire personnel to watch our 50 prisoners a year.
Okay.
So when you look at the numbers, it doesn't really work out very well. That's why doing these combined areas with multiple towns makes the most sense.
Okay, great.
I have a question. Do any of those costs get passed along as part of the fine or anything like that to the?
I just brought that up the other day because we're going to be talking to our council to look into some of that to see what we can and the best way to go about recouping some of that. And that's the difficult part.
Right. I mean, I still think it's a deal, right? I still think that I'm still completely in favor of it, but I was just wondering if we can sort of pass that along.
Yes.
Anything else?
I move to approve the resolution.
I second.
Motion to approve in a second. Any discussion on the motion? Any public comment on the motion? Seeing none, Clerk Sol.
Trustee Evans?
Aye.
Trustee Costs?
Aye.
Trustee Galagos?
Aye.
Trustee Marshazga?
Aye.
Trustee Mateo?
Aye.
Trustee Clarity?
Aye.
Motion approved. We have two other items on the agenda, community solar discussion and update related to impervious surface standards. Okay. The community solar discussion, I'd like to suggest that we table that. If we can't get to it in December, we should be able to get to it in January. And it's, from the nature of that, it's something that doesn't need action immediately. But it's a discussion we definitely want to have, for sure. The other item is update related to impervious surface standards, and we do need to proceed with that as there's a public hearing coming up.
Yes.
So, planner siren, thank you.
The staff and Planning and Zoning Commission have been working on this issue for a while and have come up with some recommendations. My purpose here is just to ask for your feedback and questions prior to our public hearing in December. And then with the recommendation of Planning and Zoning Commission, this will be coming back for you as a recommendation for a text amendment in the early new year. I'd be happy to review, I know it's been a long meetup, be happy to review what's in the memo or just answer your questions.
I had asked Ann a question earlier today about this, and that's that the proposed draft language changes how we treat permeable pavers, where it actually reduces the amount of those that are considered or pervious surfaces. I always get mixed up. And so the suggestion was that anyone who's already got permeable pavers that were permitted and certified to be permeable could be excluded from future calculations, and so we don't create nonconformities. But right now, this is just basically direction to proceed for the Plan Commission to proceed with a public hearing. And any input you might want to give at this point, you'll get another shot at it when it comes back from the Plan Commission. Anything else from the trustees?
So is the only incentive the discount right now?
It is. The discount rate is the incentive.
Thank you. It's been a very long time, so congratulations getting it to this stage.
Yes.
We're very happy.
2020.
Is there a consensus then to direct the Plan Commission to proceed with the public hearing?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, there is. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ann. Trustee reports, are there any trustee reports this evening?
I just have one public save the date. If you haven't known already, the annual holiday stroll will take place on Friday, December 6th in our downtown district. We will also have a very first street sign available for raffle, so please participate in that as part of our 150th fundraising
Happy
celebration.
St. Nicholas Day.
I guess it is.
Thank you. Thank you, Trustee Gallegos. Any other trustee reports? None. We do have a need for executive session this evening to discuss the appointment, employment, compensation, discipline, performance, or dismissal of a specific employee or legal counsel, and to discuss collective negotiating matters. Can I ask for a motion and a second to adjourn to executive?
So moved.
So seconded.
Motion and second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
None opposed.